From Washington, D.C., the swamp itself, this is the week's worst with Allen and Vadum.
I'm Dr. Stephen J. Allen, Vice President and Chief Investigative Officer of the Capitol Research Center.
And I'm Matthew Vadum, Senior Vice President of Capitol Research Center and Editor-in-Chief of BombThrowers.com.
And I'm Jake Klein, Media Producer at the Capitol Research Center, and I'll be moderating this podcast in which we dig through the news for stories that we think are the most outrageous, the most ridiculous, the worst. So since former FBI Director James Comey's firing, the subject of our podcast last week, talk of impeachment has hit its highest level yet. Materials from Comey have leaked to the press, and he'll be testifying in front of Congress and the public next week. And a special counsel has been appointed to run the Russian collusion investigation. So let's handle some basics first. Steve, you're a lawyer. Why don't you walk us through impeachment? So what is impeachment?
Well, impeachment is simple. By the way, it's been 7 days since our last podcast, 7 days in May, for anyone who wants to look up that reference to the famous book and movie about a coup against the President of the United States. So the impeachment process is sort of simple in its outlines, which is that the House of Representatives determines that there have been high crimes and misdemeanors, or a high crime or a misdemeanor committed by the President of the United States or whoever it is they're impeaching. They can impeach any federal officer. And then that goes to the United States Senate, where there's a trial. And the Senate has the trial, they deliberate, and then they vote. And it takes a 2/3 vote to remove the President of the United States. This has happened, proceeding like this has happened, gone down the road pretty far 3 times in American history. Once was President Johnson after President Lincoln, who was a Southern Democrat who had been put on the ticket to sort of make a national unity ticket with Lincoln. And then Lincoln was very soon assassinated. And so Johnson comes in and pursues policies that the so-called radical Republicans, the ones who were very much in favor of reconstructing the South and giving rights to blacks. He pursued a lot of policies they didn't like, so they impeached him. However, there was a trial. Impeachment does not mean removal. It means that you're going to have a trial. And then they had a trial, and by one vote, he was kept in as president. This was treated by President John F. Kennedy, or Senator John Kennedy then, when he wrote Profiles in Courage, the book that won the Pulitzer Prize. Actually, it was ghostwritten for him. But anyway, he treated this case as one of courage. The person who cast the vote that kept the president from being removed from office, because, of course, Kennedy was a Democrat. And so he took the pro-South side in that discussion. And then, of course, we move forward to Watergate and President Nixon. Nixon resigned before the final vote on impeachment in the House. The committee had approved the impeachment resolutions, and he was about to be impeached. So he resigned before that could happen. And then Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton was impeached for the conspiracy, to organize a perjury campaign to cover up his relationship with Monica Lewinsky and all the crimes that he had committed to protect himself from that being disclosed. And, of course, he was acquitted in the Senate, although enough of the members of the Senate said he was guilty that if they'd actually voted their consciences, he would have been removed. But there were a number of Democrats who said, well, he's guilty in effect. He did these things, but that we are not going to vote to remove him from office because that would be a political act. So that's the history of it. And now we may be going through it again with President Trump.
So what do you need exactly for impeachment to happen legally?
Well, there's no real set definition of what is meant by high crimes and misdemeanors. Every time this comes up, there's a big discussion. It's basically political. Will the public accept? Will the members of Congress accept that these things, these bad things have been done? And generally speaking, it just means sort of the same as corruption. But like I say, it's always tailored to the particular situation, and there's always a big argument. Remember, this is I've gone through this twice before in my professional life. I actually won an award when I was when I was a teenager for my coverage of Nixon's resignation. I did a special on that for the radio station that I worked with there with my partner at the radio station, and now and then of course the Bill Clinton thing, and now this is this is the third time maybe that I'll be covering this, and every time it's varied. All the definitions change. What's the old statement that old rule that all procedural arguments are insincere? You basically argue procedure based on which side you want to win, and that's the way each side does it every time this comes up in an impeachment fight.
Okay, so let's say Trump does get impeached, or in the case of any impeachment, then how would that lead to removal from office? What is the pathway? And what has to happen?
Yeah, and again, it's very important for people to remember that impeachment does not mean removal, as we learned from Bill Clinton, who was impeached, but he was not removed because you do have the trial in the Senate, and you have a lot of grandstanding. You have prosecutors and defense acting, and it really is a trial. I remember the Chief Justice at the time wore very flamboyant robes, and that was made a big deal of because there he was on national television, Justice Rehnquist at the time, the Chief Justice.
Flamboyant for the U.S. Supreme Court. I believe he had gold stripes near the collars of his sleeves.
Right, and I'm not really commenting.
By boring Supreme Court standards, that was totally outrageous.
Right, and I'm not criticizing him. I'm just saying that was one of the things that people latched onto and talked about a lot.
I just thought that sartorial observation was a little much.
Yeah, well, I'm not one to talk about fashion, so there's not. I don't really know much about that, I guess. But it's a big deal, and the last time this happened, the Republicans paid a price. It probably hurt their prospects in the subsequent elections, and certainly in the House, where it had been expected that the Republicans would make gains, and they didn't. That led to Newt Gingrich being forced out as Speaker. A lot of that was overplaced confidence in the idea that the Republicans would pick up seats. If you look at the history, I did an analysis where I showed that they really should not have been projected to pick up seats. And so it was one of those things where if the expectation had been different, then the reaction to what happened would have been different. But people were expecting a lot, so they were very disappointed, and they blamed it on Newt and got rid of him. So the irony was that it forced out Newt Gingrich, and then that led to the elevation of a child molester to be the Speaker of the House and be next in line for the presidency after the president and vice president.
And it also introduced a provision of Scottish law into America because Senator Arlen Specter tried to vote not proven, which is a verdict available to juries in Scotland. And instead of, he was a weasel, so he wanted to equivocate. But I think that was not proven was rejected, and he just had to vote nay.
Before we move on from this, though, and get into the actual politics right now, I just want to make sure we're really clear about what the mechanics are, because I don't think a lot of people actually know. So, Steve, if you want to just run down from us. So, who votes, number one, to make impeachment happen? How does that happen in Congress? Then, how does this vote work on conviction in terms of the actual trial part of impeachment?
Yeah, it would be first referred to a House committee, presumably the Judiciary Committee, and that's
this is convention. This is
convention.
The House could just take the whole thing up by itself.
They can do it however
they
can change the rules at any moment they want to. If they follow the tradition, then that would be it. So then you would have hearings in that committee, and you would have a lot of grandstanding on the part of both sides, and people trying to play for the TV. And those would this would be covered. Interrupt. Well, they used to preempt soap operas. Do they still have soap operas on during the day? I don't know, but
I think so.
People used to complain because their soap operas would get preempted every time there were impeachment hearings.
Well, people do have their priorities.
And then it would go to the once the committee, if the committee recommended, if the majority of the committee voted for impeachment, then it would go to the House. You'd have a vote in the House, and then once the House voted, if it was a majority was for impeachment, then the president would be at that point impeached. and then it would go for trial to the Senate, and it would require a trial, an actual trial, conducted generally in public. The deliberations would be in private, and then you have a vote, and it would require a 2/3 vote. So
right, and the president is represented by defense counsel, and there are prosecutors. Some senators, do they not? Or prosecutors are appointed, or people are appointed to prosecute the case, to speak on behalf of the prosecution, the people trying to, I guess, on behalf of the people of the United States.
Right, and you would also have the lawyer for the president.
Right.
You would have Cheryl Mills, for example, argued the case for Bill Clinton, who later showed up in the Hillary investigation when she acted as Hillary's lawyer over the stolen emails.
And in the House, these people who keep the process going along, you could consider them prosecutors too, in a sense, are called impeachment managers. And I lived in in a congressional district of one of them, Congressman George Gekas, Republican, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So he got a lot of publicity at the time for his role as an impeachment manager.
And this can be a good or bad thing, depending on the district and how people back home react.
Well, it made Bob Barr, former congressman from Georgia, really famous.
And he ended up being the Libertarian Party candidate for president later on. And Lindsey Graham was a prosecutor, basically, in the House. And he ended up being elected to the U.S. Senate, where he still is today. And so this can change the course of political careers.
All right, so moving on to the practical politics today. Do you think a Trump impeachment is likely?
No.
I know that the left is pushing very hard for it, but you've got to get it through the House, where the Republicans control things. I know the left is hoping for big gains in the 2018 election, but that's pretty far down the road. You'd have to keep up a lot of momentum till that point.
Well, the whole Trump-Russia conspiracy theory was concocted to kneecap President Trump to prevent his agenda from going forward and to protect Barack Obama's legislative legacy. So the goal isn't necessarily to kick President Trump out. It is to frustrate the Republican agenda. I'm not sure that they would be very happy if Mike Pence, a hardcore social conservative, were to succeed Trump in office and actually become president. Presumably, that would make a lot of Democrats sweat, because he is their worst nightmare.
Yeah, and remember, the point of an investigation, this is what people don't understand about how crooked Washington is. The point of an investigation is not to find out what really happened, at least not on the part of most of the people who were involved in this kind of controversy. The point is to drag it out, so you destroy the reputation of the person who's being investigated. You never come to a conclusion, or at least you drag it out as far as possible, because every day that the person's being investigated, they're not getting jobs. Nobody's taking them seriously. Their name is besmirched.
Their agenda's not going forward.
Their agenda's not going forward, and so all the things like tax reform that the president wants to do, those things wouldn't be happening. That's why,
right now, there's plenty of Republicans who are talking about bailing on President Trump.
That's why the stock market
they're afraid to back his legislative initiatives, because it's driving his approval. It's arguably driving his approval ratings down with the public, or on the other hand, keeping them where they are, which is fairly low.
Yeah, Karl Rove has talked about who I'm not a big fan of, but he does know about some of these things, and he's talked about that the president may be frozen at the high 30s or low 40s in approval ratings, simply because there'll be all these people who hear these things and figure, well, there's smoke, there's fire, something must be going on, he must be doing something, and in fact, that's what most of my Democrat friends, they don't really have specifics, and
they just hate the man.
They hate him, therefore he must be guilty, and of course this is a big thing for fundraising and organizing for left-wing causes. The New York Times, I've got an article here, Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns, and they're talking about the demands of the radicalized party base are being amplified by growing calls from a series of Democratic candidates for statewide office who are, and what they say is that basically people are running around the country for statewide office, and this is a way to win the Democratic primary, is to play to your party radicalized. I mean, how radical do you have to be called radicalized by the New York Times, for goodness sake? But you play to your party's base, say, I'm the one who's going to stand up to Trump, so vote for me for state auditor of Missouri, or whatever the position is. Is there a state auditor in Missouri? I don't know. But anyway.
I'll bet there is.
And this is how you get elected to all those offices, by saying, remember, we're talking about within the Democratic primary, where people hate Donald Trump, by saying, I'm the guy who's going to stand up to Donald Trump, and my position is dog catcher of Wisconsin. And so that's what, so the party's being pushed in that direction. Meanwhile, you have Move On. I mean, this is one of the great ironies. Move On is sending out emails, and they're raising
Move
money.
On, which can never move on.
Which can never move on. Which was founded to get people to lay off of Bill Clinton in the impeachment controversy.
Do we want to
That's
just
what Move On refers
quickly
to.
define for people what Move On is?
Move On is a political pressure group, and it uses. It was one of the first, I think, to start using the internet in a serious way to organize politically, and so if they're upset about something, they'll send out a mass bulletin to their members, and a mass emailing. They'll say, we need you to sign this petition right now if you care about the environment, or if you want to prevent Donald Trump from building a casino on top of Old Faithful in our national parks, or turning the American side of Niagara Falls into a water roller coaster. Whatever the terrible things that the people they don't like want to do. So they'll send out these breathless bulletins. President Trump is a traitor, and we need to remove him. Can you send $5 right now to help us with our latest advertising campaign? We need 300,000 in these key states to run these ads to put pressure on the appropriate elected officials. And so that sort of stuff. And they've been it's a large outfit. I think I'm technically considered a member. There's no membership fee I'm aware of. If you're on their emailing list, you're a member. I just did it for opposition research purposes. But they have been, in terms of their effectiveness, they have been effective at times.
But here's the thing. They started as a petition, an online petition, to lay off of Bill Clinton when he was being impeached. So they were the people who said, this is not, we got to be serious about this. Only use impeachment when
it's all about sex.
And,
blah,
and,
blah, blah.
All of that. And they said, censure him and move on. So basically that you pass a resolution saying he was really naughty and he shouldn't do that anymore. And then you forget about it. And that was where the name of the organization came from, was censure and move on. Excuse me. And so they had moveon.org was their website. Again, as Matthew said, they were one of the first groups to organize online. And so they became famous from this, and they still exist to this day. And now, of course, they're pressuring to have impeachment of Donald Trump. So, these things switch around. But they're supposed to be on July the 2nd now. We're going to have impeachment marches. So, all the people who were behind the stuff around the inauguration or the recent marches for pseudoscience, they're going to be involved presumably in these July 2nd impeachment marches to pressure Democrats, and particularly Democrats, because we do have this very polarized system now where most Democrats in Congress are in in the House anyway, are in very Democratic districts. Most Republicans are in very Republican districts. And so if you're a Democrat, you've got to, be in with your party's base, because you're more likely to get primaried. That is, have someone challenge you within your own party, than you are to end up with a serious Republican.
And
challenge.
your Democratic Party base is typically severely under-medicated.
Right. And by the way, it's J.B. Pritzker, who's running for governor of Illinois, is one of the Democrats who's using this in his primary campaign.
Well,
so that's a familiar
I'm
name.
sure they'll be using it for local government campaigns, for county board of supervisors and mayors as well. We've got to stop the Trump agenda. Somebody's probably thinking about it in Berkeley or on San Francisco City Council as we speak.
Delia Brown, one of the organizers of the march in Los Angeles, was quoted by the New York Times saying, "This is now the zeitgeist. It's the demands of the people we're responding to."
All right, so when it comes to the actual impeachment itself, the most highly speculated cause of what Congress would use to impeach is not actually the Russian collusion, but rather obstruction of justice in the investigation of Russian collusion. So let me just lay it out. So this past week, an anonymous FBI source leaked to the press that Comey wrote a note after a meeting with Trump where Comey recorded that Trump had requested, quote, Trump, I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go. So that's combined with Trump's firing of Comey after the Flynn investigation continued and was not let go. So what do you think about that legal reasoning? Is there anything to obstruction of justice from that evidence? And also, I guess, could there be more that might lead to an obstruction of justice charge credibly?
Well, first off, there's no underlying crime. There's no proof that, well, with Flynn, I don't think anybody's even accused him of committing a crime. He's just accused of unethical practices and things that he should have disclosed that he didn't disclose, like his work with Russia, his contacts with them, and
in fact,
Turkey and various other places.
If I could jump in.
These are not crimes necessarily.
Well, actually, you are, there are certain things you are required to disclose, but apparently with regard to his work for a Turkish businessman, and remember, Turkey is a member of NATO. It's an ally of the United States. The strongman of Turkey was considered the foreign leader closest to Barack Obama.
Right.
But anyway, so supposedly he did this work, and it was for, it was like a front for the government.
Let me just amend that these are not serious crimes if they're crimes.
And in this case,
minor
he
crimes.
did disclose it. He just disclosed it under the wrong part of the wrong law, and that so they'll get him on maybe possibly on a technical violation, which of course will be blown up into a major criminal conspiracy.
People
by the
do this
media.
all the time. There's this sloppy. John Podesta's done the same thing, and they it's just been ignored.
And then he gave a speech which was connected with RT, which is the Russian news service, along the lines of the BBC and France 24, the British and French propaganda services. This was a news service, but yes, of course, it's backed by the Russian government, like most big organizations in Russia are. And so they said, well, this counts as working for a foreign government. Of course, he reported it to the appropriate authorities both before and after he gave the speech. And this was properly considered. His security clearance was renewed afterwards. So that this is so you're right on the underlying so-called crime. And of course, we don't know what the deal was with what he said that supposedly misled the Vice President of the United States. We don't know what that was. But there's no indication again that that's a crime. And of course, that was something he said, knowing that his conversation with the Russian ambassador was being taped. So it's hard to believe that he would have someone this sophisticated who ran the one of the top intelligence agencies would not realize that would try to do some sort of crime in the course of that conversation. It's just not plausible. But there we go. So, and that's the underlying crime. Which is a problem, because if there's no underlying crime, there's no obstruction of justice. Generally speaking, there are exceptions we can get into.
Conrad, that was not the case with Conrad Black.
But let me say this. Yeah. Let me say this regarding Comey. He had an obligation to report this if in fact in February, when this supposed conversation took place, and remember, we've got a reporter who claims that someone called him and claimed to have a memo that claimed to be a recollection of this conversation, which was written after the fact. So we've got to, it's even if it's all real, it's based on Comey's recollection, and we all know how people remember conversations when they write down later on what was said in the conversation and how imprecise that can be. And precision is very important, because you have to have a threat for this to be obstruction of justice. You have to have a threat, or you have to have something done corruptly, meaning to cover up an actual crime that involves the person, like the president, who was the person saying this. And here's what happened. Comey didn't report it to the proper authorities afterwards, indicating he didn't think that there was anything wrong with this.
Or he was concealing it for future use, a la J. Edgar Hoover.
Which would make him corrupt.
Yes.
And therefore not a good witness. And then he said in testimony on May the 3rd, congressional testimony, he was asked, has it happened? It says, the question was, so if the Attorney General or senior officials at the Department of Justice opposes a specific investigation, can they halt that FBI investigation? And he said, no, not in my experience. So, and he went on to elaborate. He was quite clear that that this is something that had not happened. And by the way, the president is over the Justice Department. I think some people are parsing this to say, well, he didn't include the president. A senior official, that would include the president of the United States.
Okay, so let me ask two questions for clarity. So number one, isn't it usual for law enforcement to hold evidence while they're building a case? So if Comey was building an obstruction of justice case, would he have to report it, or would he potentially be collecting evidence until then there's evidence and he would refer it to a prosecutor? So that's question one. And then question two is, so for an obstruction of justice charge, we were talking before about, there has to be a criminal offense, but is that necessarily the case? Could there just be an investigation of a criminal offense, or does it have to get to the point where there has actually been criminal wrongdoing found? Because as we're seeing now, and as is all over the papers, this is now, quote, a criminal investigation, which wasn't it that the whole time, but I don't know. So those two questions, if you would.
Well, the answer is the words are, one of the words used is corruptly. Another word used is threat. And to say, this guy, which is how it's, fairly being reported in some sources. Again, the memo that may exist, that may be reported fairly by the source, and then the reporter who may be reporting that correctly. But the characterization is that Trump says something like, this guy Flynn, he's a good guy. He's served his country for decades. We should just let it go. In other words, this is not significant enough to do that. By the way, the president has the authority to do that under the Constitution, to shut down an investigation entirely. But then the question is this something that's corrupt? That is to say, is it a crime, particularly one involving the president himself? So you couldn't just say necessarily, even that Flynn, if he had somehow committed a crime, that would be sufficient. But let's say that it was. It would embarrass the president, I guess. And then, or it has to be a threat. And what's the threat? Like, I'm going to fire you if you do this. If he, and that language is very important, what he actually says. Or did he say something like, sleeping with the fishes or some sort of code? But there's no indication he did that. And again, the fact that Comey did not report it, which he had an obligation to do, and that he later said no such thing had ever happened in the Justice Department to him, that indicates that, at least on this, he did not think it was significant at the time. And if he didn't think it was significant then, why does he think it's significant now?
Okay, and then the other question about the obstruction of justice charge. Does there actually have to have been criminal wrongdoing found, or
you mean an underlying crime?
Yes. Does there have to have been a conviction of an underlying crime, or is an investigation of a potential crime count?
It has to be done corrupt. In that case, I think the word corruptly is the one that applies. So theoretically, you could do it. Let's say it was something like Hillary, for example, the WikiLeaks. Hillary did not. Her people did not technically steal the election in the legal sense of the term, but they did. But they did. In the case of WikiLeaks, Hillary's people did not, as far as we know, technically break the law. Maybe they did in stealing the primaries from Bernie Sanders, but that was removed and that was reported in WikiLeaks. It was exposed. Nobody denies that it took place. All the people involved lost their jobs. So that would be possibly corruption. That might be. If a president tried to cover that up, that's corruption, even though it's not a criminal act. I don't know. That's getting into a territory we really haven't gotten into. But it would have to be something that would be considered corruption in order for obstruction of justice to obtain.
Okay. So let's move on to the other big part of the
Move on. Was that a pun?
No, it wasn't. So the Russian collusion investigation is still ongoing, and a special counsel to run the investigation has been appointed by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. That counsel is Robert Mueller, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
It's actually pronounced Mueller.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's a former FBI director. He has broad support on both sides of the aisle. So if you would define for our listeners, first of all, what is a special counsel and how will the investigation change now that there is one?
Yeah, when there's a situation where it's deemed that the people in the Justice Department, and that includes the President of the United States as the nation's chief law enforcement officer, that an investigation can't be conducted that's fair because of the influence, that you're investigating the people at the Justice Department or investigating the president, then you can have a special counsel appointed. This goes back to 1875. This has happened a number of times in American history. After what happened in Watergate was that famously there was the Saturday Night Massacre, and that's where a special prosecutor, as the term was then used, but these are all pretty much interchangeable, independent counsel, special prosecutor. Actually, in this case, Mueller is an independent a special counsel. Special counsel is the term they're using for him. But what happened in the Saturday Night Massacre was that you had a very left-wing prosecutor who was appointed, who was a part of the Kennedy political organization, Kennedy being Nixon's main political opponent at the time. And they demanded, special prosecutor demanded the White House tapes after the taping system had been revealed in order to prove or disprove the case, or to get Nixon, basically. And Nixon had him fired. So he ordered the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, very left-wing Republican, a rhino, ultra rhino, you might say, in today's terms. He ordered him to fire Archibald Cox. Richardson refused. He was fired. His deputy, William Ruckelshaus, was then ordered to do it. He refused, and then he was fired, and that became known as the Saturday Night Massacre. Finally, the third person in line, Robert Bork, who was later nominated for the Supreme Court but didn't get on there. He was the Solicitor General. He was next in line, and he basically said, "Look, you can't just keep firing everybody. Somebody's going to do this." And so, out of that whole controversy, there was a law passed that set up a system where a 3-judge federal panel would appoint a special prosecutor. That law was allowed to expire in 1999. It was probably unconstitutional anyway, and so you've had situations like the Iran-Contra under George H.W. Bush, that scandal. And in that case, it affected the outcome of the election, possibly because there was an indictment at the last minute of Caspar Weinberger, who'd been Secretary of Defense. And then that nobody actually went to jail. I think 11 people were indicted, and no one ended up going to jail. It was a totally fake investigation. Later, you had the Valerie Plame case, again, a totally fake investigation. She had been outed as a CIA agent effectively by her husband, and it was blamed on people in the George W. Bush administration. In between there, you had the...
and then Scooter Libby.
And Scooter Libby
took the fall for it.
Totally unjustly.
Who's now at the Hudson Institute and is actually a pretty well-respected thinker.
Yeah. And of course, in between, you had the Clinton thing, and everybody who follows political history knows that. So that brings us up to the present, where there's this procedure put in place. The Attorney General can appoint a special counsel, they're now called. And in this case, it was the Deputy Attorney General, because the Attorney General had recused himself from this investigation. And that person essentially has the powers of a federal prosecutor, a U.S. attorney, and can rely on the help of FBI agents as investigators and so on, and can technically be fired by the Deputy Attorney General in this case, or even by the President. But the political fallout would be such that he or she is pretty much untouchable under normal circumstances.
So, but what does that mean for the investigation? Compared to how it's been running up till now, do you expect anything to change, be it in public perception of the investigation, or be it in terms of how the investigation is actually running within the government?
Well, I think most people do respect Mueller. There's a little concern that he is close to Comey. Comey, I think, Mueller was at one point referred to as basically Mueller was referred to as basically Comey's mentor. But most people are happy with the choice. If someone's got to do it, they're not necessarily happy that this was done. But if somebody's going to do it, and then it depends on where the investigation goes. And these things are incredibly unpredictable. Who would have known when you started investigating a real estate deal under Bill Clinton that you would end up with Monica Lewinsky? And so this could go in a lot of different directions. I'm one that hopes I hope it goes to the origin of the so-called dirty dossier that led to the spying on Donald Trump by the Obama administration. And there are those of us who want, in Watergate, the person who did the spying was considered the bad guy. In this case, it's the victim.
That being Christopher Steele's 34-page dossier, which was leaked by BuzzFeed, and
that Jeb Bush's people may have had something to do.
It originated with Never Trump Republicans and was handed off to Hillary. And this was the group that did it, as far as the American group that connected with Christopher Steele, the British former MI6 agent. They were the people who tried to frame Newt Gingrich on a charge that I was involved in over the years that he turned out to be completely innocent of. They did the thing where they made it look like the Planned Parenthood videos about baby part selling were somehow altered, which they weren't. So this is not a reputable group of people from my point of view, but this is who came up with this stuff. And then it was used to justify spying on Donald Trump. That's the scandal to me, that you spy on your political opponents, and that's not the focus of this. It's just amazing.
Well, and also the irony is that Obama's the most, as you pointed out before, the most pro-Russian president in American history, and always bending over backwards. Remember, tell Vlad, I'll have more flexibility after the election. That open mic incident with Dmitry Medvedev, and Hillary Clinton's business ties to Russia, approval of 1/5 of America's uranium supply, a sale to Russia. There's so many connections between the Democrats and the Russians, including traditionally, like with Ted Kennedy, undermining the Reagan administration by offering help to the KGB.
The history of the Democrats being involved in Russian involvement in U.S. elections is very extensive, and I look forward to it being revealed.
That's our show for this week. We'll be back next week, and we hope you'll join us. If you're not already, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, and follow us on social media at Capital Research Center on Facebook and YouTube, and at Capital Research on Twitter.
I'm Dr. Stephen J. Allen.
And I'm Matthew Vadum.
And I'm Jake Klein. Thanks for listening.